Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed my tutorial and sample gameplay for Mars Attacks. Just want to take a few minutes and to go over some final thoughts about Mars Attacks, the game. Then we'll take a few minutes to discuss the family friendliness of it. I enjoy the family friendliness of a game as a parent of two young board gamers. Then we'll take some time to discuss how much or how little I think you're getting for your dollar value with the Mars Attacks board game. Mars Attacks, the board game, has a lot of great things going for it to mention. First of all, the best thing about it is the game is very easy to learn in a very, very good way. The game is pretty simplistic. Each one of the units, if they want to do something, they have some statistics. They're simply going to roll some dice and look for some successes, and whoever you're trying to do something to needs to look at their statistic, roll a couple dice, and see if they can avoid having what you're trying to do done to them. Pretty simple mechanics, not that hard to explain, not that hard to teach, and very, very easy to learn, and I mean that in a good way. The simplicity of the game also continues to the line of sight, which is also extremely simple. It's basically, if you are the Martian player and you're trying to do something to a soldier, if you can see that soldier, you can do something to him. If you can see the entirety of the soldier, including his base, you're going to get a bonus to it. If you can barely see him, you're still going to be able to do it. And if you can't see that soldier at all, you can't do anything to him at all. Very simplistic. There's no room for arguing, no charts you need to pull out or anything that a lot of the miniatures gamers love to get into that annoys the typical board gamer. Very simplistic. Get down to the eye level. If you can see it, you can do it. There's also tons of expandability built into the game from extra miniatures, which you can use, and there's rules for these guys that bring them into the game, from the giant stompy robots to flying saucers for the alien player, to vehicles and elite military personnel for the good guys to help them defeat the extra powerful units from the alien player. And all these do come with the expansion rules, which are going to add tons of things like additional missions, what they like to call the epic rules, which takes that small skirmish level battle you saw where there's like 8 human players versus 5 soldiers, and brings up on the grand scale where you can have up to 30, 40, or even 50 miniatures on the board, or you can even connect multiple mats together to form even larger battlefields with more buildings, and make extremely large battlefields that are going to have multiple players, that are going to allow you to have up to 3, 4, or possibly even more players, although I haven't tried it, but I have gotten up to 4 players quite easily with one person controlling a faction and another player controlling a faction, and getting all 4 factions out on the board and having a heck of a lot of fun. And quite honestly, you don't even need all these expansions to get more than 2 players out on the game board. You can very easily make it where some of these missions are just basically 2 or even 3 hero survivors versus some Martians. You can have one player controlling all the Martians on the board, and then you can split up the heroes among the players, each player controlling 1 or possibly even 2 heroes, depending on the scenario, making an easy 3-player or even a 4-player game, making it almost like a Descent dungeon crawler style of game. So even out of the base box, quite easy to play with more than 2 players. And I didn't show this in my sample and my tutorial video because I didn't want to get too deep into it, but I also really enjoyed the heroic rules for the heroes. Basically, you had some good decisions you need to make on your turn, because you have your heroic points, which can be used for a couple different things. You can use your heroic points for some extra movements, you can use your hero points to use your special abilities, or you can use your hero points to save your bacon, because every person in this game is one hit and you're killed unless you have a hero point to save your skin. So sometimes you may want to use those hero points to get that extra boost, that extra attack, or whatever it may give you, but then you're losing, basically using up your hit points, making some very, very tough decisions that you got to make, adding to the gameplay and the enjoyment of Mars Attacks. I also really enjoyed how the players have to share the same deck of cards, meaning that there's a chance your card that you're really wanting may not come up, because there's a chance that your opponent knows that you need that card, and there's no way in heck they're going to discard that card and use it and give you the chance of having that card come back up again if you manage to go through the entire deck of cards in the discard pile. And that becomes very possible in some of the larger, more in-depth scenarios that take more rounds to play. And I didn't get into this in my overview because I just want to look at the basic game, but when I was talking about expandability, there is some awesome expandability to the game. The epic rules are very, very cool. It turns the game into a point system game where each player gets a certain amount of points to buy their armies. Units cost anywhere from a couple points to quite a few points, and you can use these big robots, you can use these flying saucers, you can use the bugs, the trucks, the specialists, and you can add in more terrain and build up your game board. Although unfortunately I had to do a lot of proxying because Mantic for some reason is not sending me any connectors for any of my Kickstarter stuff. So all my stuff is still stuck in the bags because I don't have any connectors to use these, unfortunately. There's tons of expandability in the game. There's even an AI deck you can get with one of the expansions. There's also a horde mode you can add in where you're having lots of monsters coming on the game board. They have tons and tons of planned expandability that's available for the game right now to improve the gameplay. And if you're just a traditional board gamer, you're not interested in the whole army building type of aspect of these kind of games, there's more expansion rule books which are going to add more missions to the game, and these are preset missions where you're not forced to buy your units. You can basically just play through the scenarios in the game, and if you have the basic game plus these two, you have a total of 28 missions to go through. Playing from both sides, you're looking at a total of 56 potential different games you can play, and that's just assuming each player only plays one side once. That's still almost 60 different games to play in one game. Now you're probably thinking at this point that I'm going to give Mars Attacks a pretty ringing endorsement and say that this is a great game and that you should definitely buy it. And I probably would give this game a lot of high kudos if it wasn't for the fact that I've already heavily invested in another game designed by Mantic Games, the same company that makes Mars Attacks, and that's Dead Zone. Now normally when I do a board game review, I don't try to compare games to other games, but this time I kind of have to, because you have two games made by the same company which are about 90% identical on many, many levels, with just a couple key differences between the games. And if I don't discuss these differences, you may not be able to decide which game you really want, and this is a very important decision, especially when you consider it is very easy to spend a couple $100 on each one of these games alone. Just to give you an idea, I'm over $200 into Mars Attacks, and all that's given me is the box game, a whole bunch of extra miniatures, including the big stompy robot, the flying saucer, a couple extra rule books, and the nice rubber gameplay mat that you saw me when I showed you the sample gameplay. So yes, it's quite easy to pay a lot of money just in one of these games alone, and unless you got a lot of money, and if you do, you're probably going to ignore what I'm going to say for the next couple minutes. But if your middle name isn't unlimited credit, you do need to make a decision about which game you want to get involved in, Mars Attacks or Dead Zone the game. One of the biggest differences between Mars Attacks and Dead Zone is the fact that Dead Zone is played as a three-dimensional game where the levels of the playing field matter, wherein Mars Attacks you're all playing on the same level field. In Dead Zone, it's very possible to start getting up on multiple levels. You can start creating some really high buildings and create some very large three-dimensional battlefields where the level of your units very much matters. Dead Zone also happens to have 6 factions out for it that play extremely differently. You have some factions that are very defensive, some factions that are very offensive, and then you have some very crazy factions such as the Plague, which are all about overrunning your opponents by outnumbering them and outmaneuvering them. Both of these games do have solo or AI rules, so you can play the games as cooperatives or as you can play just by yourself versus a horde mode or something along those lines. Both of those games do have rules included to play that. The two really big differences between the two games, though, besides the two-dimensional versus a three-dimensional aspect, is that Dead Zone is designed for smaller squad-based tactical combat where each one of your moves matters, especially when you play the campaign game where your units are going to level up, they're going to gain experience, and they're going to get more powerful. And it can be very interesting, almost have some RPG feeling to it, because your decisions can really matter, especially if you lose a unit who's been leveling up over some various campaigns and become very, very powerful. Mars Attack counters that by having what I like to call, or as the rules call, the epic mode, where you're going to have the potential to have some extremely large battlefields where each player can have 20, 25, or even 30 models on the battlefield, making some extremely large battles. That can be a heck of a lot of fun, but it can be a lot more chaotic, especially with the card play, when you start getting the randomness of some of these events that are going to pop up that can kind of ruin your strategy. So to me, Mars Attacks feels more of a less strategic game and more of a mass combat, have a lot of fun, and you're going to have fun with it, but don't always plan on your strategies working out. Whereas opposed to Dead Zone feels like it's a very deep tactical game where every one of your units matters. Losing a unit can be very damaging to your squad, so you want to be very careful, making it a much more tactical, much more strategic, much more long-term kind of game. Right now, if I had to pick between the two, I definitely would pick Dead Zone over Mars Attacks, and that's basically my final point I wanted to make here. Dead Zone, for me, even though it's more of a miniatures gamer's game, and you have to do a lot of assembly, a lot of gluing, and some of that gluing can be it can be a pain in the neck, especially when you have to glue faces on helmets, you have to glue arms on torsos, guns on hands. It can be very, very troublesome, and that's one of the advantages that Mars Attacks has. It is ready to go out of the box. As soon as you open it, you can take it home and start playing the game. But for me, I liked Dead Zone as a better game because I appreciate the strategy of the game, how the strategy is deeper. I appreciate how the game has a better campaign system where every one of your decisions matter, and I also appreciate the more of the RPG feel where you may have a hero on your squad, such as a sniper who's made it through multiple missions and survived for a long time. And you can name these guys because, these are guys you've been carrying through multiple campaigns. And sometimes they've saved your team, or sometimes you have great memories of when that one sniper held down a death corridor versus an onslaught of marching horde figures who are trying to tear apart your mission force. Mars Attacks, like I said, is a good game. It's a very good game if it's the kind of game you're looking for. It's very much a board gamer style game. But if you're looking for a deep strategy game and you're trying to decide between Mars Attacks and also decide between Dead Zone, I hope I've given you enough information to make your decision. Mars Attacks has some pretty good potential as a pretty good family game. The game does say it plays for only 2 players, but thanks to some pretty good mechanics and the large amount of scenarios that come with the game, it's quite easily possible to play with more than 2 players. You can do multiple ways of doing that. You can have one player controlling the Martians and then break up the human survivor forces among the other players and make it almost like a dungeon crawler game such as Descent or other games that work on the same kind of principle. The game also has the nice advantage that it does play very, very quickly. It's very easy to get a game in about 45 minutes on average, especially if you're just playing with 2 players. The game be pretty quick. Most of the scenarios fall in that time frame. I think the longest scenario I played is about 1 hour and 10 minutes. But I've gone through a lot of scenarios. I got all 28 scenarios because I do have all the expansions. So I've gone through a couple of scenarios from each book. So there may be some scenarios that run longer than that, but of the ones I have played, I haven't seen any go much longer than 1 hour, which is definitely a nice plus, especially if you're looking for a game to play with the younger ones who can't sit still quite that long. And by younger ones here, I'm talking about 9 or 10-year-olds. I'm not talking about 5 or 6-year-olds because that's definitely way too young for this game. This game is pretty darn easily playable by anybody about 10 years up and over. You basically have to be able to read some text on the card, and there's not too much bad text. There's not anything that's going to be really too terrible for a 10-year-old to see. I wouldn't go too much younger than a 10-year-old because there is a couple images on some of the cards that shows decapitations, some blood. And again, it's mostly cartoony, but the fact is the images are there and probably not images you want the younger kids to see. Basically what I'm saying is that this is a really good game for anybody ages 10 and up, and for the player group, I want to go more than 3 or 4 players definitely. Again, I haven't tried it, but it just doesn't seem like it'll work that well. But the game definitely does work as a 2-player game, a 3-player, and a 4-player game, especially with a wide variety of missions, and it's definitely very easily playable for ages 10 and up. Now that you've heard my thoughts on Mars Attacks the game, I want to take a few minutes to discuss just what you're getting in the box and see if it's pretty much worth your dollar value or not. Now, Mars Attacks does retail for $80. And for that $80, you're basically getting everything you see in front of you right now, except for the fact that I painted a lot of the miniatures. They all come unpainted. The heroes all come with a basic red plastic. The military guys all come with a kind of a tannish colored plastic, and all the Martian guys all come with a kind of a turquoise greenish colored plastic. And since he's technically a hero, even though he's a bad guy hero, he does come with a red plastic. But they all do come with colored plastic, so you don't have to paint the game, unlike some of those miniatures games where everything comes as a gray plastic. You're kind of forced to paint everything just so you differentiate on the battlefield. That's not the case here, which is a definite nice touch. And speaking of the miniatures, the game does come with 40 miniatures, and these quality of these miniatures I'd probably equate to let's say Last Night on Earth, Flying Frog production styles games. They're not terrible, they're not bad, they actually hold detail pretty decently, and I've actually inked a couple of them so you can see just how well the details do show up on a camera, because it's kind of hard to see the details on a camera. And I did go through and paint a lot of them too, but the detail on them is decent. Again, it's not great, but it's what I call board game quality. But if you get some of the expansions, and I don't want to throw those in here because it's not part of the basic set, if you look at some of the expansion managers, it almost gets to the quality of probably Fantasy Flight games such as the Descent game, especially when you look at the bugs. The quality does definitely improve, and it's very good considering this isn't the kind of plastic that you need to take home, pull out your snips, pull out your files, pull out your super glue, and try to assemble. This game is basically playable right out of the box. And on top of that, all this scenery comes with a little connector system, and it's really cool. Unlike in Dead Zone, which is another game made by Mantic Games that I talked about in my review, the connectors on here are actually pretty darn easy to assemble. They pop in and out very, very easily. I never had any problems assembling these, and they hold together on the battlefield, and you can drop them. They don't fall apart, so they do sit in there snug enough that you're not having problems, but just with a little bit of wiggling, they do come apart very, very easily. So They definitely took some time to improve on these over what you had with Dead Zone. Now, Dead Zone wasn't bad, but some of these connectors didn't fit very well, at least in the first print run. So you ended up working with a file just trying to get those buildings and everything to hold together. And that's kind of a pain, and it's kind of nice to see an actual miniature company such as Mantic Games put out a board game that is very much catered to the board game crowd. No assembly required, no glue required, no files required, no paint required. You can pretty much take this game, pull it out of the box, and start playing once you know the rules. The cards that come with the game are also very high quality, and some people may be disappointed by the art, not realizing that this art is actually based on a Topps trading card game from the 1960s. It looks kind of like old artwork, and there's a very good reason for it. It's not modern artwork. They kind of took the idea of the original Mars Attacks games, which is looking at over 50, Mars Attack, but the Mars Attacks trading cards, which is about 50 years old now, and kept the theme of those cards to match with the game. And on top of that, these cards are very high quality. They all have artwork on the back of them. They're going to last a long time. There's no need to sleeve these cards. These aren't flimsy cards. They're very good card quality. They don't bend at all. And even trying to bend them, you see that just me putting a lot of force on them, it takes that to bend them. Because they're pretty much good quality cards. They're going to last a long time. No complaints about the card quality component for the playing cards. The game also comes with 6 dice, and that's not quite enough to play the game. When I play this game, I usually have 10 out, and I have tons of 8-siders laying around. You know, old RPG player, I have tons of dice in a dice bag. So not a big deal to me, but 6 dice is definitely not enough to play the game. You generally want each player to have at least 4, possibly even 5, because it's quite often pretty much common for a couple times each game for one player to have to roll at least 5 dice at a time. Especially if they get a couple 8s, they're going to start rolling even more dice. So you probably want to pick up some more dice. Definitely not enough just to have 6 in the box. Mantic Games also did a great job with the rulebook. The rulebook is designed to look like a comic book, and the rules are written very well. The game isn't really even that hard, so they didn't have to go that deep or that much into detail for the rules. But the game does explain how to play the game very easily. You're probably not going to have too many questions once you learn what the terms mean. The difference between a round, the difference between a turn, and stuff like that. It's not that hard of a game to learn. And the game also comes with 10 scenarios in the back of the rulebook, and it gives you a good feel of how to play the game. So they definitely did a good job on the rulebook. But now we need to come to the point where I have a couple complaints with the quality of the components. My first major complaint is the board that you actually play on. Now, if you watch my videos, I actually don't use the board that comes with the game, which is actually just a piece of paper folded out with some artwork on to make it look like it's a city. And this is extremely thin paper. It's very easy to tear this, to the point that they actually shipped 4 of these with the Kickstarters, and one of mine, after just a few games, ended up being torn. Luckily, Mantic does supply a rubber mat, which you're going to pay extra for, but I highly, highly recommend you order this rubber mat. It's a lot more durable. It's 100 times better than using this piece of paper, because this stuff tears easily. You're going to unfold this probably 3 or 4 times before you get a tear in it. At least that's the luck I had. I have 4 of these. 2 of them are now in the trash. Luckily, I don't have to use them anymore because I do have this rubber mat, and I highly recommend, if you're going to pick up Mars Attacks and you enjoy it, buy this rubber mat. It's going to save you tons and tons of headaches. The next major problem I have with the game is the cutouts that come with the game. Now, these cutouts used for the civilians, you'll notice I used plastic miniatures for the civilians when I showed you the gameplay. And the reason why is because these cardboard cutouts come with these little stands that do absolutely nothing. They can't even stand up. They're not even cut properly. You couldn't even place these guys on a table without them falling over. They're completely improperly cut, completely worthless, and they don't work at all. And it's just as bad for the large ones, such as the flaming cows. If I let go of it, the pieces fall out because they're not cut and slotted well. They did a pretty poor job cutting and slotting these pieces of cardboard. They're pretty terrible, especially since you're playing $80 for a game. Yeah, granted, it does come with 40 miniatures, but $80 for subpar components. Unfortunately, the reality of things is subpar components are remembered longer than quality components. It's a sad reality, but it's very true. They did a pretty lousy job with the cardboard in the game. And there's one final missed opportunity, at least for me, with Mars Attacks. When you're paying $80 for the game, you'd like it to be pretty easy playable out of the box when it's a board game. Miniatures gamers are used to working a little bit extra harder for the games, but board gamers generally are not. The game does not come with any reference sheets outside of the main rulebook where players can look at the stats of their units at all times. If you want to look at the stats for your units, you need to pull out the rulebook, find the stats page where your stats are located, figure out what your stats are, and then pull it back to the scenario page to figure out what you need to do for the scenario. And if your opponent needs to look at stats, guess what? You need to hand the book to them, and you're going to be passing this book back and forth the first couple times you play the game, because you need to learn what your stats do, learn what your special abilities do, and trust me, you're not going to memorize these the first couple of times you play the game. It's going to take a half dozen plays before you memorize what most of these do, and before you can go through most of these scenarios. It's a big missed opportunity. I personally, since I was a Kickstarter backer, I used my printer to print some of these out, which was an amazing resource. And they could have very included this along with a small piece of paper scoreboard as 2 extra sheets of paper, just so you can keep the statistics for your units handy so you don't have to pass the rule book back and forth. In my opinion, it's another missed opportunity and something that hopefully they take care of in second print runs for the game. Overall, though, $80 for what you get in the box, 40 miniatures, a large amount of terrain to build up your game board, some okay cardboard components, and a pretty terrible game board. $80 isn't too bad at all. The game does have lots of expandability, which is a definite plus. And that expandability can help you overcome some of those component limitations, such as a real vehicle that isn't on a cardboard stand that doesn't work too well, or a real bug miniature that you can put on your game board that works a heck of a lot better than these cardboard standees, where the inserts don't even hold into them at all. So there's ways around it, so that's not that big of a deal. Hopefully Mantic Games takes care of a couple of these inconsistencies in the second print run of the game. Again, the cardboard, the lack of printouts, and they really need to include a game board, or just raise the price of the game to $90 and throw one of these rubber mats in as the game board, because the game board that comes with it is just not adequate. This has been another off-the-shelf board game review looking at Mars Attacks by Mantic Games. Thanks again for watching.